You ever hear something that slices right through you? Something so cruel, so casual, you wonder if they even know they've broken you? I remember the moment like it just happened. He looked me dead in the eyes and said, "You'll never be wife material. You're just practice." And then he laughed. But that wasn't the worst part. His friends were there too, standing around with their whiskey glasses and perfect white teeth, and they laughed even harder. One of them actually said, "She's just good for a night." Like I wasn't standing right there, like I was invisible. And you know what I did? Nothing. I just stood there, frozen. Not because I didn't care, God, I cared, but because I couldn't believe that the man I loved, the father of my son, the person I thought I would grow old with, had reduced me to a joke in front of a crowd. That was 2 years ago. I went from being his fiancée to being his forgotten, from the woman who packed his lunch every day and rubbed his shoulders every night, to a name he no longer said out loud. The only time I existed in his world was when it came to our son, Eli. And even then, he barely looked at me. He moved on quickly, too quickly. Met someone younger, flashier, Instagram-ready, Sasha. Blonde hair, fake laugh, surgically perfect everything. Within a year, they were engaged, and my son, our son, was invited to be the ring bearer at their wedding. But I'm getting ahead of myself. You need to know me before you know what happened. My name is Naomi Ray. I'm a mother, baker, a woman who's been told more times than I can count that I'm too much, too intense, too emotional, too serious, too ambitious. And for a long time, I believed it. When Darren and I met, I was 24, working 2 jobs, waiting tables at night, managing the front desk at a vet clinic during the day. He walked in with a crooked smile and a voice that could talk anyone into anything. He was charming, confident. He had this way of making you feel like the only person in the room. I was hooked. At first, it was like a movie. Romantic dinners, long drives, talks about our future. Kids, a house near the water, Sunday barbecues. We even had a name picked out for our daughter, Lila. But things changed after I got pregnant with Eli. Suddenly, I was too emotional, too demanding, too much. He stopped touching me, stopped listening. And when Eli was born, he barely held him. That was the beginning of the end, but I still clung to hope. I told myself he was stressed, that once the business picked up, he'd come around, that if I just worked harder, looked better, stayed quieter, he'd love me again. Instead, one night, he came home drunk, reeking of perfume I didn't wear. And when I asked where he'd been, he just laughed. "You'll never be wife material. You're just good for a night." And then he left. Just like that, like I was trash being taken to the curb. I remember sitting on the floor that night, holding Eli as he slept and thinking, is this it? Is this what I was worth? But what I didn't know then was that one day, at his wedding, it wouldn't be me who said the words he needed to hear. It would be our son. And when he took that mic, everything stopped. The music, the laughter, the wedding, all of it. Before everything fell apart, I used to believe that love could fix anything. I believed in soulmates, in growing old with someone, in second chances. I believed that if you gave enough, forgave enough, and loved hard enough, things would fall into place. They didn't. But I still believed. I was 24 when I met Darren Whitmore. I had just moved back to Richmond trying to rebuild after my dad passed. My mom, Marlene, was strong. The kind of woman who didn't cry at funerals but cooked casseroles for everyone who did. She raised me and my little brother without a single complaint, but I always knew she wanted more for me. I think that's why Darren felt like a win. He walked into the vet clinic where I worked the front desk, asking about shots for a puppy he never even brought in. I think he just wanted to talk. That was Darren. Charming in the most calculated way. He wore tailored suits and drove a sleek car with leather seats that smelled like cologne and confidence. Everything about him screamed, "I've made it." And he made me feel like I had too. He'd show up at my night job, leave $100 tips for a coffee, tell me I deserve more than greasy aprons and split shifts. And when he looked at me, it was like I was the only person in the room. No one had ever seen me like that before. Or maybe I just hadn't seen myself that way. He was 6 years older, already running a small marketing firm. I was working 2 jobs just to afford rent on a basement apartment and keep gas in my car, but he never made me feel small, not at first. 6 months in, I moved in with him. A year later, we were engaged. He gave me a ring with a stone I was too scared to ask the price of. I wore it like armor, like proof that I mattered, like this was my happy ending. And it almost was. For a while. When I found out I was pregnant, I was terrified. I cried, not because I didn't want the baby, but because I knew things would change. I didn't know how much. At first, Darren was excited, or at least he acted like he was. We picked out paint colors, argued over names, looked at baby swings and strollers. He said we'd be unstoppable, just the 3 of us. But as the months passed, something shifted. He worked later. He slept less. His touches felt colder, almost like he was checking a box. He started snapping over small things, burnt toast, a misplaced charger. I stopped bringing things up. I told myself it was the stress, that once the baby came, it would all go back to how it was. When Eli was born, it was the happiest and loneliest day of my life. I held this tiny, perfect boy in my arms and cried tears I couldn't explain. Darren held him once for a picture, then spent the rest of the hospital stay on his phone, pacing the hallway, texting someone he wouldn't name. Still, I tried. I read books on how to reconnect after a baby. I planned date nights. I lost the baby weight as fast as I could. I smiled when I didn't feel like it. I told myself that if I just stayed patient, he'd come back to me. But Darren didn't want a wife anymore. He wanted an audience. He started disappearing on weekends. Said he had business trips, conferences, meetups. He stopped coming home for dinner, then stopped texting at all. He was there, technically, but only when he had to be. Stopped asking questions when I realized I already knew the answers. Then came the night that broke me. He walked in late, drunk, reeking of perfume I'd never worn. I asked him where he'd been. He didn't lie. He didn't apologize. He just looked at me and said it. "You'll never be wife material. You're just good for a night." I didn't cry. Not right away. But the second I heard his friends laugh in the background, heard them echo his words like it was some kind of joke, I felt something in me split. I wasn't heartbroken, I was humiliated. I packed a bag for me and Eli and went to stay with my mother. I told her I just needed a break, but she saw right through me. She didn't say, "I told you so." She just held me while I finally cried, and in that moment I realized I had no idea who I really was outside of being someone's placeholder. But I was about to find out. The hardest part about heartbreak isn't the pain, it's the silence that comes after. The kind that fills your chest when your baby asks why daddy doesn't come around anymore. The kind that wraps around your throat when you pass by the nursery you painted together and realize he never came back to finish the trim. After I left Darren, I moved into my mother's guest room with Eli and started piecing together what was left of my life. I didn't want pity. I didn't even want revenge. I just wanted peace. Something still. Something quiet. But peace is a strange thing. You can work your fingers to the bone to build it, and it only takes one moment, one envelope in the mail to tear it all down again. It was a plain, white envelope. No return address, just my name and Eli's scrawled in someone's cursive that clearly wasn't Darren's. Inside was a cream-colored wedding invitation with gold foil lettering. Darren Whitmore and Sasha Marin invite you to celebrate their union. I stared at it for a long time. Like maybe if I read it enough times, the words would change. Maybe it would say, "Sorry for what I did. I know I broke you." But it didn't. Of course it didn't. Instead, it ended with, "We would be honored if Eli Ray would serve as our ring bearer." I felt the blood drain from my face. They didn't even ask me. They just expected it. Like I was some unpaid nanny on call for a man who couldn't even say my name out loud. I wanted to scream, to shred that card into 1,000 pieces and set them on fire. But Eli saw it before I could. He was sitting at the kitchen table coloring in a dinosaur book. When he looked up and saw the card in my hand, he asked, "Are we going to Daddy's wedding?" I didn't know what to say. I wanted to protect him. I wanted to say, "No, he doesn't deserve you. He doesn't deserve anything." But I couldn't let my bitterness shape my son. I had swallowed enough poison in that relationship. I wasn't about to feed it to him. So I just said, "Do you want to go?" He looked down at his crayons, thought for a second, Then he said something that stunned me. I think I need to see what kind of man he really is. It wasn't the kind of thing a 10-year-old usually says. Eli has always been an old soul. He watches people, listens more than he speaks, and he had seen everything. He may not have known the details, but he had felt the tension, the loneliness, the way I held back tears behind bathroom doors. That night, I cried after he went to bed. Not because I was sad, at least not just because of that, but because I realized how much strength this little boy had inherited. A few days later, I agreed to let him go, but I gave him something before he left. It was a toy microphone, one of those cheap voice recorders that looks like it came from a cereal box. I told him it was just for fun, that he could use it to pretend he was announcing the wedding or being a DJ or whatever made him smile. But the truth? I gave it to him because I was scared. Scared of what Darren would say in front of him, scared of what he wouldn't, scared of being erased completely from my son's life now that Darren had someone new to play family with. I didn't expect anything from Eli. I didn't plan anything. But that microphone became more than a toy. It became the thread between the truth and the show Darren was trying to put on. In the days leading up to the wedding, Eli kept asking questions about me and his dad. Not childish ones either, real questions. Did you love him? Did he make you happy? Why did he stop? And each time, I tried to answer gently. Honestly, I didn't bash Darren. I didn't need to. The truth had enough weight on its own. Eli started carrying the mic everywhere. He said he liked hearing his own voice, but I could tell he was thinking, processing, watching. I didn't know it yet, but he was planning something that would bring every hidden truth back into the light. And Darren, he had no idea what was coming. The night before the wedding, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was sad. I'd already cried all those tears a long time ago. This time I was restless for a different reason, a mother's instinct. A storm you can't see yet, but you can feel coming. Eli was in his room packing his little bag, his tiny suit, his favorite sneakers, a book for the drive. He was humming to himself like it was any other weekend visit with his dad, but I could tell something was off. There was a quietness to him, not the kind that comes with fear, but with focus, like his mind was already somewhere else. Need any help? I asked, standing in the doorway. He shook his head. I'm almost done. I watched him place the toy microphone in his backpack. It was a small purple plastic mic I'd picked up from a dollar store, one of those voice changers that plays back whatever you say. It had barely any battery left. You sure you want to bring that? I asked. It might not work anymore. He looked at me with those big, knowing eyes of his and said, Yeah, I think I might need it. I didn't ask more. Part of me didn't want to know. Another part of me knew that whatever Eli was carrying, it was his. He'd heard enough in his short life to know that sometimes the grown-ups don't always get it right. That silence can hurt as much as words. That night, I lay in bed, replaying every conversation we'd had over the past 2 years. Every moment I tried to shield him, every time I smiled through something that cracked me open inside. And I wondered if maybe I had been wrong to keep so much from him. Maybe trying to protect him from the ugliness had left him searching for clarity on his own. The next morning, he was dressed and ready before I even finished my coffee. He looked so handsome in his little blazer, holding the wedding card like it was a ticket to some movie he wasn't sure he wanted to see. I knelt beside him and straightened his collar. Listen, I said, you don't have to do anything that makes you uncomfortable, okay? Just be yourself. Be kind, that's enough. He nodded slowly. Then, as he turned to pick up his bag, he said over his shoulder, What would you say to Dad if you could? Just one thing. I paused. The question hit harder than I expected. What would I say? That he broke me, that I had to teach myself how to breathe again after he left, that he made me feel like nothing, then made a show of replacing me like I was a broken chair. But all I could say out loud was, I'd tell him. I hope he finds what he's looking for, even if it wasn't me. Eli looked at me for a moment longer, then smiled. Okay, he said quietly. I drove him to Darren's house, where a black car was already waiting to take them to the wedding venue. Darren didn't come out to greet me. Sasha did. She waved, too brightly, her white teeth gleaming like stage lights. Eli hugged me tight before he got in the car. He didn't say goodbye. He said, I'll see you soon, Mom. And something about the way he said it gave me chills. I went home and tried to distract myself. I baked, cleaned, reorganized the spice cabinet. But the hours dragged. I kept checking my phone even though I knew Eli didn't have one. I had no idea what was happening at that wedding until around 5 p.m. when I got a text from my cousin Lena, who worked at the hotel venue. All it said was, "Your son just took the mic. Everyone stopped, even the music." I read it 3 times, and then I sat down. My heart raced, but not with fear, with something else, something that felt a lot like hope. I didn't know what Eli had done, or why, but I knew my son. I knew his heart, and I knew that if he spoke, it wasn't for drama. It wasn't revenge. It was truth. And for the first time since the day Darren walked out, I wasn't afraid of the truth anymore. I was ready for it. I wasn't there when it happened. That's what gets me sometimes. I didn't see his face when Eli stepped forward. I didn't hear the silence spread through the room or feel the weight of all those eyes watching a 10-year-old boy walk up to a microphone in the middle of a wedding ceremony like he had something important to say. But I've heard the story enough times now that I can picture it like I was standing in the aisle myself. The wedding was being held at some vineyard outside of Charlottesville. High-end, expensive, Instagram perfect. Darren always loved a spotlight, and Sasha, well, she was practically born for it. Her whole life looked like it came with a ring light and a social media filter. They had flowers hanging from the ceiling, a string quartet, champagne before the ceremony. Eli said the chairs were white with gold ribbons, and everyone smelled like expensive perfume and tension. He was dressed in his suit, holding the ring box in one hand and the toy mic in the other, tucked behind his back. He told me later that his hands were shaking, but his voice was steady. I believe him. The ceremony started. People smiled, took pictures, cried on cue. Darren looked like the groom from a magazine, confident, polished, like nothing in his life had ever fallen apart. And then the moment came. The officiant said, "You may now kiss the bride." That's when Eli stepped forward. No one stopped him. He was just a kid, ring bearer after all. Probably looked like he was doing something sweet or funny, until he raised the mic to his mouth and said clearly, "Before you kiss, I think my mom wanted this played." Everyone went still. Sasha laughed nervously. Darren looked confused. Then Eli pressed the button on the mic, and there it was, my voice, shaky, tired, recorded without me knowing. I didn't even realize Eli had saved that moment, the one from the night before the wedding, when he'd asked me what I'd say to his father. The audio was raw. You could hear my breath hitch, my voice cracking, and then the words, "I'd tell him. I hope he finds what he's looking for, even if it wasn't me." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Chairs shifted. Someone dropped a glass. But Eli didn't stop there. He spoke into the mic again. "She never told me to say anything. She didn't even want to come, but I thought everyone should know. My mom never tried to hurt anyone. She just loved my dad, and he left her behind. Then he laughed about it. And I don't think that's funny." He stepped back, placed the mic gently on the table near the officiant, and sat down. Not another word. Darren stood frozen, his mouth slightly open, as if waiting for a cue that never came. Sasha turned toward him, blinking hard, like she couldn't quite believe what she'd just heard. Guests looked between them, whispering. The music didn't start. The kiss never happened. And then, just like that, the show was over. I didn't hear from Darren that night, or the next. It wasn't until 3 days later that he sent a 2-line message. "Eli doesn't need to be involved in things like that. Let's talk." I never replied, because there was nothing left to talk about. Eli came home the day after the wedding, quiet at first. I didn't ask what happened. I didn't have to. He finally spoke that evening while we were baking blueberry muffins for the neighbors. "I just wanted them to hear your side," he said, pressing the batter into the tin. "They always hear his." I stood there for a second, holding the spoon in midair. Then I looked at him and said, "Thank you. I don't know if I deserved that, but thank you." Eli shrugged. "You deserved more. You just never asked for it." That's when it hit me. This little boy, born in the middle of a broken promise, had become the voice I never had, not for revenge, not to ruin a wedding, but to make space for the truth. And maybe that was the most beautiful part. In a room full of lies dressed in white and gold, my son chose honesty. And the wedding? It didn't survive it. But we did. The week after the wedding, everything felt still. No drama, no phone calls from Darren, no angry messages from Sasha or anyone from their side, just a quiet kind of peace, like the air after a storm finally clears. I kept waiting for the fallout, for someone to show up at my door to blame me for what Eli did. But no one did, because deep down, they all knew the truth wasn't cruel. It was just inconvenient. And truth has a way of sticking. It doesn't need permission to exist. It just waits to be heard. Eli never asked if what he did was okay. He didn't brag, and he didn't regret it either. He went right back to being a kid, riding his bike, asking for waffles, leaving his socks all over the living room like nothing had happened. But I could see the change in him, something subtle, a little more grounded, a little more sure of who he was, and in that I started finding my own footing again. For so long, I lived like I was half finished, like I was waiting for closure that would never come. I kept thinking if I just stayed quiet, if I handled everything with grace, eventually I'd be seen, that someone would finally say, "You were right to feel what you felt." But no one came to say that, and I stopped waiting. Instead, I poured myself into the life I was building, into my small bakery, into the warmth of a house where laughter wasn't forced, and into the kind of love that doesn't ask to be earned. The bakery took off faster than I expected. Word spread about the divorce pies, as people jokingly called them, rich, bittersweet chocolate ganache with sea salt and a caramel center. Pain wrapped in something sweet. People understood that. One morning, an older woman came in and said, "You're Naomi, right? The one from that wedding?" My niece was there. She said it was the realest moment she's ever witnessed. I smiled and handed her a slice of lemon cake. That was enough. As for Darren, we kept things civil, basic. He still picked Eli up every other weekend, still sent birthday cards, but there was a new distance there, one I didn't mind. He never brought up the wedding, never asked about the recording. I think he knew that if he did, he'd have to admit what he said, what he did. And Darren never was good at holding a mirror to himself. At first I hated that. I wanted him to say something, to explain, to apologize. But eventually, I realized I didn't need his words. I had my own now. One night, months later, Eli and I were watching a movie on the couch, blankets everywhere, popcorn spilled, one of those perfect ordinary nights. He turned to me out of nowhere and asked, "Do you think Dad's mad at me?" I paused, then said, "I think he's more mad at the truth." Eli nodded slowly, eyes on the TV. "I didn't mean to hurt him." "I know," I said. "You didn't." And that was that. Because in the end, this wasn't a story about revenge. It wasn't about getting even or ruining someone else's big day. It was about a woman who got told she wasn't enough, who was laughed at, humiliated, pushed aside, and still found her way back to herself. And about a little boy who saw his mother's pain and decided not to look away. There's a kind of power in that, quiet power. The kind that doesn't need fireworks or fists, just a voice. Just one moment of courage, spoken into a cheap plastic microphone. That moment didn't fix everything. It didn't erase the years I lost or the heartbreak I carried. But it gave me something better. It gave me clarity. It gave Eli strength. It gave the truth a place to live. Out in the open, where no one could hide from it anymore. So no, I wasn't wife material. Not for him. But I was more. I was the woman who walked through fire and didn't burn up. I was the one who raised a boy brave enough to speak when it mattered most. And now? Now I sleep well. I laugh loud. I love better. Because I stopped waiting to be chosen. I chose myself. And that made all the difference. If this story spoke to you, if you've ever been made to feel like you're not enough, like your voice doesn't matter, then let this be your reminder. You don't need permission to stand in your truth. You are more than what they said about you. You are more than what they left behind. And sometimes healing starts with being heard. If you felt something today, if Naomi's story reminded you of your own or someone you care about, like the video so it reaches someone else who needs it, share it with a friend who's still finding their strength. Comment below. Tell me your story, your turning point, or just say, "I'm still standing." I read every single one. And if you want more stories like this, real, raw, and honest, subscribe to the channel. We're building something here, a space where people are seen, heard, and never laughed off again. Thanks for watching. Until next time, stay strong and stay true.